Good afternoon, Michelle.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, great, thanks. Nice to be here today. Apologies for missing last fortnight. We got a free pass last fortnight. I was up at Beef Week, and I didn't think it'd kind of work trying to run one of these out of the sort of the mad crowd up at Beef Week. So anyway, here we are again, Michelle. Great to see you, and we've got a few things to talk about today, and a lot of these sort of came out of instances that happened while I was away and conversations I had with people. It's amazing how many people you run into at Beef Week, but so they sort of came from conversations, people I ran into, and just issues that came to top of mind. So if you're happy with that, we'll power away.
Sure.
The first thing that sort of came to mind, Michelle, was, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, is at what stage does the son or the daughter-in-law sort of have a moral right to share of ownership of assets and all those sorts of things? And to explain that a little bit more, the interesting thing is, when I'm sitting down talking to mum and dad, and we're looking at how to protect assets, if their sons or daughters get married, and you're looking at putting protection around the assets against sort of bankruptcy and failed marriages and all those sorts of things. And the poor old sons, and especially the daughters-in-law, tend to get a bad rap in their early years. They're always seen as sort of the devil incarnate, so to speak. And everyone's trying to protect against someone coming in, marrying into the family, and wandering off with half the property. So. But the ironic thing is that when I'm sitting there talking to mum and dad about, protecting against this, usually the mum was the daughter-in-law many years ago herself. So, eventually, which just got me thinking, when's the time between, when they're teenagers in their early 20s first getting married and sort of when they're getting close to handing the business over, when does that tag of daughter-in-law or son-in-law go away and that person have more right to entitlement, and I hate that word, but more right to the assets and the ownership and all that sort of stuff than they did when they started. So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's tricky, and it really depends on the person, the family, what they're doing. But I think when they start to introduce children, and often the daughter-in-law, i.e. the new wife, is raising those kids, possibly on the farm, while the husband is managing the farm, and the wife is possibly managing the farm as well as running the family. So that's a pretty good reason to have some sort of moral right to part of the family wealth. And same for the son-in-law. If the daughter, her family has the property, and he comes in and starts working on the farm and contributing in that way, then that's when you need to start thinking about what sort of future they have there and what they might be entitled to.
Yeah, absolutely. It was just one of those things that sort of hit me the other day, and I thought, when is that point in time? It's an interesting one because, the original bloodline, so to speak, owners of the property, always have this desire to protect it, and there's been so many times when bad planning has led to dynasties being unraveled, so to speak, because failed marriages have meant that properties have had to be sold, or businesses have had to be sold, and so on. And but yeah, it just got me thinking, and I don't know what the right answer is, but certainly, once and I will say right from the start is that it's always our practice, and Michelle, you'll be aware of this, is it's always our practice when we help people with estate planning, succession planning, is that if anything happens to the let's just say the son is the next generation coming onto the farm, and he gets married, and the daughter-in-law comes along, and so on. We always want to make sure that if something happens to the son, that the daughter-in-law is going to be okay, and especially if there's kids involved and whatever, as much as we can protect assets so that they, excuse me, pass down the bloodline to the children. we want to make sure that in that case that the daughter-in-law is going to be looked after, and there's going to be income and so on, which is generated to look after her because she's looking after the kids and so on, and I guess that it's something that I guess when we're meeting with clients on an ongoing basis, the time comes when that the passing on to the son, there needs to be recognition and respect for the role of the partner as well in regard to that scenario. So I don't think there's a set time, and I guess it's another reason why you need to review this sort of stuff on a regular basis, isn't it?
Yeah, and looking after the spouse can be as straightforward as just having some income for her and her kids to move on and find somewhere else to live. But it could also be as deep as having a role still on the farm. If they've had input into that for years, then they want to continue that because that's their business and their job. So all of that can be worked into the situation. It just depends on what works for you.
Yeah, look, absolutely. Excuse me. And I mean, the bottom line is, and especially where, and look, we're not being sexist here, but I mean, we're talking about a son with the daughter-in-law coming along. Most times they're very integral in the running of the business anyway. And if the son was to pass, many times the daughters-in-law can come in and be involved with the ongoing running of the property. They might need to get some jackaroos or whatever to come in or shed hands to help them, but they might be very integral in regard to running the business, and even though it's normally set up that the asset will always pass down to the grandchildren, certainly the income and the benefits of that will always reside in the spouse of whoever may have passed in the meantime. So I just want people to know that we're very conscious of the role of spouses in regard to the whole estate and succession planning process, and we want to make sure that everyone's always taken care of. There was a period there where I think there was a thought maybe that because we were putting bloodline protection, so to speak, in place, that it meant whoever the spouse of the child was going to miss out, and that's certainly not our intention and certainly not the case. And I think the spouses play a very important part in the whole process. So, and we see that all the time.
Yep.
Okay. One of the other things that, Juanita would be disappointed, it's taken us at least 8 minutes to use the word communication, but communication between family members is really one of the biggest issues in regard to estate and succession planning. And I saw as recently as last week where a particular family was really imploding because mum and dad just weren't having the conversation with the kids, and the kids were begging for involvement and communication in regard to what the future looked like and so on, and mum and dad sort of weren't having that conversation. And I'll let you have a go first, but there's a few reasons I think parents sometimes get a bit scared to bring the subject up. Your thoughts?
Yeah. I think it's really hard for people to talk about if they've been living and working on the farm their entire life and have been like generations before them. It's really hard to think about your future not on the farm and what that might look like. And so even just raising that with your kids to talk about passing that on and who's going to take on what role and accepting the fact that you eventually are going to need to leave the farm, whether that's due to choice or not, can be really confronting. But the problem with leaving it too late is your kids, if they don't know what they're aiming towards, then they may, they'll be a bit lost, but they may also seek other jobs somewhere else. So they might leave the farm instead of staying there, knowing that that's in their future.
Yeah, they might go to the big smoke and see what the big smoke's got for them instead of staying on the farm. And I think there's just so many reasons that mum and dad don't have these conversations, and certainly one of them is I think they get scared about what their future is going to look like.
Yep.
For most, it's all they know. They feel that if a son or a daughter is going to take over the running of the farm, they wonder, one, what their role is, and two, are they going to get kicked off? Where are they going to live? What are they going to,
Yep.
what will their life become? They're used to being important. They're used to being able to walk down the street in town and be recognised as, Fred from, Wagga Wagga Station or whatever it is, and they've got an identity and they've got an ego that goes with that, subtly or otherwise, and so they get a bit concerned about what they're going to do and what their future is going to look like, and I think part of transition planning that we do in estate and succession planning is actually helping people say, well, okay, no, you've got a future. You can't. I always use the example: you can't run up the fence in the cattle yard as fast as you used to, and the bulls go faster than you used to be able to,
Yeah.
or you can now. And so comes a time where you've got to start handing over some of the roles and responsibilities and so on. But the key part to it is, Michelle, really is the communication, isn't it? And if people can have open and fair communication, I mean, it's up to the parents to talk about their fears, to talk about they're worried about where they're going to live, what they're going to do, what opportunities they're going to have, what happens when they get too old to do certain things and they need care and help and so on. And but the problem really is, and as I say, I saw this last week, is where this particular family, they've left it so late, and I call this the exponential grief curve. That each year you leave it, it doesn't double, it quadruples, and it sort of compounds the grief within the family, because once your kids start getting married and then they start having children, just causes all sorts of problems. And your children can be sitting there saying, we trust mum and dad, they're going to do the right thing, but the spouses are sitting there saying, well, what the bloody hell are we doing here? It's your family, it's all very well you trusting them, but and they worry about if they separate, where does that leave them? So they've invested 10 years of their life, living on a farm. If something goes wrong with the relationship, they're back to zero. They've got nothing in their own name, no future, no certainty, and so on. So communication is just such an important part. And I tell people, even when your kids are young and they're still at school, have the conversation so that everyone's really clear in regard to what it's going to look like when they come home.
Yep.
Okay. No other thoughts on that?
Nope. I think you've covered it well.
I do talk too much. I know. One of the other things that came up when I was at Beef Week was, I looked at a few different, there was some of the presentations made and so on at some of the banks and some of the organisations and so on. And there was a lot of conversation around having family meetings and, getting together and sitting all the kids down and putting an agenda together. And I hear this all the time, and I think, well, that's great for certain types of people, and it's great in certain circumstances. But what I see is there's all different sorts of kids, and some will sit quietly in the corner and they'll get the irritations when the meeting's over because nobody listened to them, meaning they never said anything to be listened to anyway. And the loud ones in the family will say all the stuff they want to say, and the quiet and meek ones won't say what they want to say. And also there's a lot of times when kids don't want to talk about what they're really thinking and feeling for fear of offending their parents. So, the whole question about whether you have family meetings or whether you need an outsider to come in and have one-on-one meetings. What are your thoughts, Michelle?
Yeah, I think that's the case in most situations. The story you'll get from somebody when there are other people around versus the story you'll get from them one-on-one can be completely different. As you say, people are sometimes too afraid to speak up or speak their mind for fear of insulting or hurting someone. And they keep quiet, may feel like they're not being heard or just don't want to be heard in that forum. So it's really important to have both. Family meetings are great in most cases, but it's also really important to have the one-on-one meetings to get, I guess, a broader picture about where everyone's at. individually as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. Whenever I have this conversation with clients, potential clients, and so on, they see so much sense in it, and they actually admit that the kids are more likely to tell the truth to an outsider than they are to within the family. And I mean, look, having my own children, I'm sure there's things they haven't told me as life's gone on as well too, which would have been nice to know, but. So kids don't always tell their parents certain things. In other words, the kids might be sitting there thinking, next year we'd like to go and spend a year over in Whistler, skiing and working on the ski runs for a year, and they don't want to tell mum and dad that because mum and dad are stressed and working too hard and all those sorts of things. And whatever the reasons might be, I think it's just important sometimes that and even existing advisors, whether it's a financial advisor, an accountant, or the local solicitor or anything like that, it's kind of pointless getting them in to have the conversation with your children because everybody's too close. They've all known each other too long, and I forgot to bring my cup of tea beside me today. So I'm very jealous of you there. But people who are too close to the family aren't the right people to have those one-on-one meetings and sessions in regard to what the future looks like, what their real thoughts and feelings are, because those people are too close to the scenario. And I say, whoever you get, make sure you get someone who's not involved in the family, someone from outside, and I really do find that when I turn up, people pretty much always tell the truth. They in fact, they're relieved to have someone to share their thoughts with, and someone who's interested and so on. And I mean, we still keep confidences for people. In fact, more and more, I'm having meetings with the mother and the father separately as well, because usually one of them wants to go and live in the city and one doesn't.
Yeah.
I'll let you guess which one. And they're not game to bring it up when they're sitting down together as a couple, but privately they're saying, we really had enough. We want to go and live close to the grandkids, or down in the city or wherever it is. And so you need to be able to have those opportunities for people to be honest about what their dreams and aspirations are, and so on. So communication is just in family meetings doesn't always work, and I think you need to get someone from outside to have those one-on-one meetings so that the truth can come out. And if something needs to be kept confidential, that's fine, but we have the skill to be able to say, well, okay, if 3 different people told us all something separate and confidential, okay, how do we need to go back to mum and dad? How can we give them direction that this is the way they should head to create the best outcome for everybody?
Yep.
And you've seen that in action, haven't you?
Yeah, often.
Yep. Okay, what about the 4th point? Do you want to talk about that one?
Yes, transferring assets early compared with putting family trusts in place for land ownership. So I guess the difference between the two being transferring or your land, your farming land to your children now, or other assets to them now, just in their own name, where it's, as you said, on the table for all of life's uncertainties, divorce, things like that, or compared with utilising family trusts to deal with succession and estate planning.
Yeah, absolutely. It was interesting. I was listening to there's one particular family we're talking up at the Beef Week, and they were talking about how they'd transferred a lot of, and in fact, someone else I've been talking to this week, who I'm going to see, they basically transferred a lot of their land, about 80% of their land, to their children already. And so there's only about 20% or something like that of the land left in mum and dad's name. And, they sort of want to make sure that that's done properly, and there's fairness around that and opportunity. But, just got me thinking, it's all very well to transfer land, and sometimes that's just what people want to do, and if that's what they want to do, then go ahead and do it. But we always try and look at transferring business over to the next generation first. Be transferring business, maybe the cattle or the cattle sheep, or the agricultural business or whatever. Transfer that over to the kids first, and look at hanging on to the land in mum and dad's name until the end. Now, not everyone wants that. Some people, just in their head, they think they want their kids to own something now, and there's reasons for that. And sometimes maybe it is the best thing, but it just comes with a lot of dangers, doesn't it, Michelle?
Yeah, I mean, it's really great that people are actually discussing and dealing with succession planning. It's kind of in contrast to the second point we talked about, where people don't want to even talk about it.
Yep.
So it's great that people are doing something about it. But just if things are just transferred just to a person, then it's just not protected from anything, and you could end up losing quite a fair bit of it if something happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, but there was one particular conversation I was involved in the other day where there was so much positivity, as there always is, in regard to all the kids are now happily married, and they've really just transferred the assets into each of their children's names, and absolutely no asset protection. It's not just about getting divorced and so on, although that's a big part of protecting your assets. But you would see, Michelle, wouldn't you? You and people in the legal industry would see neighbours suing each other a lot more than they used to as well, aren't they? So there's spray drift is always the example that's thrown up, but there's plenty of reasons, aren't there, why neighbours can sue each other. And if you just hand a property to one of your children without proper planning and structuring, that asset is at absolute risk. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Any litigation, assets in your name are called in, so you could lose them. So it's really important to look at all of your options with handing down property to kids in your lifetime, and ways to structure that to protect it.
Yeah, I mean, you can still hand things over to your children in a lifetime, can't you? But it's the use of trusts and so on as part of that planning process would be something that you'd want to have a look at, and always we always involve accountants in those sort of conversations. Sometimes for some reasons, accountants just have a brick wall when it comes to any sort of trust, and you would know exactly what I'm talking about. We've got a few clients where their accountants have, we're trying to help them with asset protection and proper structuring and tax minimisation and so on, and the accountants, for whatever reason, just have a mental block about family trusts and so on. So it's good to get proper advice and maybe talk to 2 or 3 people in regard to how best to structure. One of the saddest things is when I sit down with new clients, prospects, whatever, and we're having conversations, and they talk about how they've purchased land recently and how they've purchased a business recently, and we just bought it in our own names. We bought it in a family partnership, and you think, oh God, if people could only get some advice before they go out and buy land or buy a business, and oftentimes they'll buy it in the same entity. So, the land and the business is in the same entity, whereas, it's nice to have them separated, isn't it, into two different entities. And it's all about just talking to the right people and having conversations about things you don't know about. But when you make big decisions, they're big financial decisions, always make sure you get some outside advice. I guess that's the takeaway from that, isn't it?
Yep, very important. Every time.
Go see those lawyers. That's right. Okay, so that's it in regard to maybe have a think about when you transfer assets, and have conversation with the right sorts of people before you transfer, and the entity in which you do transfer to. One of the final things I just wanted to chat with you about today, Michelle, was what happens when mum and dad eventually do need care. And it sort of ties in with the last thing I wrote down, which is the transition from running the farm to eventually having to to move to town. We stroke a lot of families where mum and dad have already bought a property, like a home in town, somewhere that eventually they're going to move to, which is great. But having the conversation and saying to Dad, are you ready yet to move to town? It's like, no, not for another 30 years. Even when they're 70, they say that because they're so used to, and they still want to be involved in the farm. And look, I actually absolutely get that. But as long as they're not maintaining their involvement in the farm at the expense of the next generation coming through and being able to have their turn, there's plenty of things that Granddad can do effectively to still be useful, checking the waters. There's lots of jobs that Granddad can do to keep him engaged and interested on the land. They don't have to leave the property. Usually, I always say make sure Mum and Dad's house is at least yelling distance away from the grandparents, so everyone has their own privacy on the property. There's no reason why they have to leave, but at some stage there has to be that time when Mum and Dad are going to need care, and you've got something set up and established so they can move into town. They can they've moved closer to medical help and all those sorts of things, and that's keeping the communication going with the next generation, but also planning ahead too. And we talk about creating silos of wealth off farm, which might include a house and an income stream, so that Mum and Dad have got absolute independence when they do move into town. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So communication is just it is hard to have the conversation, but once you start having it, it doesn't mean right then and there is when your time at the farm ends. It's just when you can start putting in place a plan for your exit. And also moving into town, into your retirement home, doesn't mean you'll never be able to do any more on the farm. You can have physical, to some degree, input. You can have knowledge input. I'm sure that your kids would love to have your knowledge as long as you are willing to give it. So there are always roles for you moving forward once you've transitioned off the farm. So really important to talk with your family about that early, so you can all work towards the plan that you put in place to move off the farm.
Yeah. Your dad's got his sorted out, has he, for when it's his time?
No, I think we need to have a conversation about that, actually.
No, that's great. Hey, Michelle, thanks again for the conversation today. There were just a few things that sort of were prompted by conversations I had up at Beef Week this week and listening to people talking about their own situations and so on. And it was interesting. There's no 100% correct way of necessarily doing anything. I sat there and watched experts get up and talk about how best to do estate planning, how best to do succession planning, and real life examples and so on. And in my head, I kept thinking, but have you asked these questions, and what if this happens, and so on. And there was certainly no one that I saw up there where I thought they'd covered everything. And I think it's a matter for families to make sure they get enough advice and to ask the right people, because it's what you don't know, which will always trip you up. It's the unknown, what we call the unknown unknowns. So anyway, look forward to catching up with you, Michelle, in a couple of weeks again, where you're choosing the topics. And until then, thanks for everyone for watching, and we'll see you at the next one.
Thanks.
See you later, Michelle. Bye.
Bye.